Hi there, welcome. I'm Bob Thompson, and I'd like to welcome you to the Philanthropic Planner Program. We're in our 11th year, believe it or not, of producing this program about the boring subject of philanthropy. We think it's important. It's important for the local community, certainly, but statewide, regionally, nationally, globally, philanthropy should be a part of our thinking, a part of our dialogue. And the reason to produce this program is to kind of promote meaningful dialogue about the importance of philanthropy. Take away the legalese. Let's simplify the complexity. Let's talk about things like capacity to give. Let's talk about reviewing, perhaps wills, living trusts. Talking about what and sharing what other people do. Perhaps your next door neighbor or somebody down the street. Perhaps a college classmate that you just read in alumni publication that there's Mary. Isn't it wonderful that Mary gave a gift to our alma mater? So there are many aspects of philanthropy, and it's kind of been a passion of mine for quite some time. And I was looking back in some of the previous programs and saw one that caught my attention. One of the problems in doing this frequently is the title for the program. Lining up guests, it's always easier for me to prepare. I prepare less when I have a guest. But there are complications involved here, scheduling, and I'm crazy enough to have, right after this, a taping for another program that I produce, another one of my passions and distractions. But looking back to 2014, 2015, I saw a title of a program called Trends and Challenges. And I thought, let's think about this, Bob. Trends and Challenges Continued. So that's our heading today, and that title. But then I looked at this issue of a Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I thought, maybe there should be a byline or a subtitle on this. So we have the two sides of behavioral economics in the world of philanthropic planning. And where the behavioral economics came into play was along with about 15 or 18 or 20 different emails, publications, conference announcements, and that type of thing, was this one, a conference in California, I believe, on behavioral economics. Well, anything behavioral catches my eye because our planning firm, we are known as a behavioral planning firm. And when we look at finances, when we look at client behavior, we have to look at the two sides of the behavioral process in that context, not just the behavior, emotional, cognizant aspect of our client, but the behavior of the advisor. So it's not until we dig deeper into knowing and understanding both sides of that we communicate better, we understand each other better. If we're good listeners, we understand. But behavioral aspect in all parts of our life, if we try more to understand ourselves, there's an old Socrates, I believe it is, know thyself. So the behavioral part of the philanthropy comes into play, and I'm not able to attend the conference. I think there are 2 or 3 conferences every month in all parts of the country that kind of drowned you. But here are the two sides of behavioral economics in the world of philanthropic planning. If we look at one side of the behavioral part, and I look at the cover of this Chronicle of Philanthropy and saying, why fundraisers are fed up. I've known for 20, 25 years that the area of professional development, fundraising on the part of nonprofits, is a very difficult and very important position in the process. The dynamics of philanthropy and what makes it run and walk and sleep and everything above. And it's kind of interesting, I think, that when we look at good economic picture, we look at consumer confidence, we look at the behavior of the market on a macro basis, bring it down to the individual on a micro, and we say behavioral. The Association of Foundations, National Association of Foundations, a year and a half, 2 years ago, surpassed $1 trillion. Now, these are foundations in an association, and they monitor the size of the assets in all of the foundations. And in 2017, it tipped the benchmark of $1 trillion. Now, part of the significance of knowing that kind of humongous figure is that there was 50-some billion dollars in grants given out from those foundations. And once this became public, maybe not so public, but certainly within the group members and so on, those foundations raised their grants from 50 billion to 75 billion, significant increase. But that's because of the growth of the foundations. Now we look at 2018, and forgive me, I'll relate that to 2018 in the market, the macro. And the Dow, I believe, in 2018 went down 4.4%. Then we look at foundations and endowments going down 2.7%. And we look at other aspects of the endowments. And then we get to something like this, and one part of being fed up is the compensation of the development professional. But it's only one part of the unsettling feeling of a development professional. And we read, and this is quite an extensive edition, and the various reasons that people, it's always been a musical chair, okay? And every 2 or 3 years, I find that someone pays more. It's attractive to me for a number of reasons. The pressure and stress and all of the peripheral stuff hasn't changed either. Executive management of nonprofits putting more pressure on the fundraisers. The goals, in many respects, by many of the planners, they believe the goals put down on them are unrealistic. And yet, if you took one piece at a time, I can live with that. It's the accumulation of all these issues. So it caught my eye, my interest when I talked about the behavioral aspect, and I said the two sides. Really, realistically, I'd be naive in saying there are only two sides. There are multiple sides, and I'm coming from the aspect of the potential donor and thinking that everyone wants to be a philanthropist. I think that everyone can be a philanthropist. You don't have to be a multi-millionaire to be a philanthropist. We talk about volunteering. We talk about other ways of giving back to society. But, when the development professional looks at the results of, let's say, 2018 and giving, I think I mentioned in a previous program recently that giving in 2018 dropped a little less than 2%, to 1.9, 1.7 or something like that, but a drop. Now you have the bean counters and the number crunchers and so on saying, whoa, our endowment is down. Now the pinch is, and even though we need more staff, the board of directors, we were reluctant to put more feet on the ground. So the pressure on that professional is greater. 34% of fundraisers say they've seen a decline in the last 2 years in giving. That's true. And put your hat on for the professional, the development professional, and saying the significance of that and the decline is that they may receive more no's. Sarah, I would like to give more, but I can't. And it comes back to that capacity that we talk about. Do I have the capacity to give? 21% agree that the negatives of their job outweigh the benefits. So I like what I'm doing. I am committed to mission. I can put up with the negatives, but it's the accumulation, as I mentioned. Problem, not enough help from leadership. The solution there is that we have a lot of technology that can help with data and retrieval there. A lot of them complain that the data that they receive is old, it's outdated. One of the couple, a donor couple, is deceased, and I've got a story here, not just recently, but 8, 10, 12 years ago. So that data is bad. Problem, unrealistic goals, I mentioned that. We have problem, too many bad managers. I think Peter's principle comes into play in any organization, corporation, nonprofit, government. We reach a level in the Peter's principle that I am kind of beyond my skill set and my ability to contribute to the good, to improve situations, to identify problems, to once I identify the problems, be creative and innovative enough for solutions. So if we have too many bad managers and again, they communicate, maybe not subtly, not with the managerial empathy, if you will, but that comes into play. Problem, lack of resources. I mentioned that. We need to invest in what pays off. But even the David Swenson at Yale, the endowment at Yale certainly didn't have the returns that perhaps they had in 14, 15, and 16. 17 was a very good year. Problem, no succession path or career advancement possibilities. So we need to train, we need to cross-train at that level. Another one, and I'll get off of this, problem, inadequate compensation. We finally get around to being prepared to pay market rate. Well, when we have the budget people looking at this, and put that aside for a second, when a nonprofit has a very good professional development officer, the board needs to recognize that and perhaps pay a little bit more to keep them in the fold. This musical chair thing, as I mentioned, is not new. But when you have a good skilled professional who knows more of the constituency and has a relationship with existing donors and with that relationship and knowledge of the donor, can talk more about plan giving. Well, if I have a relationship with some donors for 5, 6, 7 years, I better not be leaving that nonprofit development office when I've invested, the nonprofit has invested in the planned giving, and planned giving doesn't happen overnight. We want cash giving, we want events, we want current money coming in. We need the current money to pay the bills and so on and so on. The planned giving professional, in my experience in the last 25, 30 years, goes through these cycles where good, bad, and so on, but it's frustrating for them. So I'll get off of this, but I thought this was certainly of interest as we talk to donors, professional planners out there, attorneys, accountants, insurance professionals, financial planners, and so on, that we need to understand, like I say, the dynamics of the behavioral economics. And again, I mentioned briefly the CAP program, the Certified Advisor in Philanthropy, which is a designation where the designee learns through the courses that they go through, both sides, multiple sides of what makes the car run on all four wheels. So let me get into a couple other things here. Free wills. The internet is, I'm not a techie and I beg off on it, but it is an incredible tool to gain information. It comes in and it drowns me like a fire hose. But we have a number of people that ask us in the planning firm, I just need a simple will. Do I need to go to an attorney? I looked up on the internet and I can get a simple will and not pay the attorney. I'd prefer in most cases that they go to the attorney for good professional advice and pay the bill for those legal docs. But if they are inclined to just do it themselves, and that's a part of the society we live in today also. I mention that because there is a site, there are several sites, and one of them from Free Will. And the data that one survey research did and tested between 2017 and 2019 to date, 50,000 people completed free legal wills or documents, 50,000 in this research survey. Of the 50,000, almost 7,000, 14% of that original group, included charitable bequests. So when we do the numbers, we filter down, and the professional development person is looking for that funnel filtering process to get to the person that is committed to the mission. It has the capacity, reviews periodically their gifting history and so on. And even in the case of not going to the attorney, but free wills, out of 50,000, 7,000 had charitable bequests, and this surprised me, honestly. This surprised me that the average size of a bequest in that test, that case, was 78,000. Nearly 20% of the wills included more than one charitable bequest. So that figure, that total figure, came up to 108,000. Again, 7,000 out of the 50,000, but a significant amount of charitable bequests, over $500 million, $541 million in that study. Now, when you're goofy like me, and you start to study that and the significance of how donors are motivated to periodically review. And I hope and I know that even on a small number, okay, that over the last 10 years, we have known expectancies of over $16 million of people who have, maybe they only tune in for 5 or 10 minutes between commercials or between a sporting event or something like that. We have over 16 million of known expectancies. I suspect that if we were to draw the sample as in this free will, that that figure would be multiplied tenfold. Saw another article in actually a chronicle online about the top cities for giving, top 10 cities for giving. And I scanned through quickly if I can, and I wanted to see if one, local or Connecticut, regionally, and 5 out of the 8 categories: arts and culture, education, environment, animals, health, human services, international affairs, religion, 8 different categories, society benefit, excuse me. 5 of the 8 had Bridgeport, Stamford, and Norwalk. Well, we get down into Fairfield County, it's not surprising that the giving would be greater there as far as the wealth in the community. The average net worth of the person in Fairfield County. Certainly Boston is represented in all categories. The largest giving city is Washington, D.C., interestingly enough. So I mentioned the 1 trillion and the Foundation Association. Let me move on for a second and talk about another 2014, 2015. I looked at Trends and Challenges title on one of the programs, and I found the name of a client and a donor, Marge. It's not a real name or a real name, but Marge, we became familiar with Marge and her husband Frank in the mid 1990s, 96, 97. Frank, the husband, died in 97. And we worked with Marge in 2001. Interesting year, 2001, but Marge wanted to create a scholarship, a student scholarship at Frank's alma mater. In fact, I take that back. Both Marge and Frank graduated from the same college. And she wanted to have a $1,000 scholarship. And we worked that out and went on for several years. We asked that people review their legal docs, their power of attorney, their health proxies and agents and so on, and their wills, just to review as we go through different stages of life. Well, Marge came back in 2001 was based on endowing her scholarship. So she was going to give $1,000 a year for a scholarship and wanted to endow that scholarship by including in her will a charitable bequest, as we mentioned here. And she noted $10,000 devoted for that purpose. And we talked to her, and instead of one scholarship in Frank's name, we had 2 scholarships, one in Frank's name and one in Marge's name. $10,000 in her will for a bequest. We again came back and reviewed that plan in 2008, not that long ago. And the attorney called and said, I'm sure you know that Marge has reviewed her will, made some small changes in a codicil, and she increased her charitable bequest to $25,000. And we figured we use, in cases like that, a 4% return on the the endowment or the gift or the bequest. And scholarships would be given out from the $25,000. 2 months ago, we heard from Marge's attorney and from Marge. She called us from Phoenix, Arizona, and said, have you talked to X attorney? And I said yes, and she increased her bequest to $50,000. We talk about percentage of bequests and wills rather than dollar amounts, but she was very proud to say she increased her $25,000 to $50,000. Now, let's come back to behavior. When we think about doing something like a scholarship, and we give annually for that scholarship, if we think about endowing that after passing, it just naturally flows that I know that the joy, and I get thank you notes from students. Thank you very much, Marge. I really appreciate the Frank and the Marge or whatever the gift was. I get that joy while I'm alive, and I get some satisfaction out of knowing that there may be 50, 100 students that get a scholarship from Frank and Marge. Knowing that, and knowing that that's a percentage of my total net worth, that I have the capacity, and I periodically review that position, that capacity. But that kind of makes this whole thing rewarding to know that there are scholarships. Now, I've shared in previous programs that every April, maybe in a little bit in May, but every April, we have a number of local high schools that have scholarship programs on programs that we've set up. That's rewarding to me to know that there are continuing funds in a small endowment form. But trends and challenges continued. Two sides of behavioral economics in the world of philanthropic planning. I've enjoyed visiting with you. I hope that this dialogue of the importance of philanthropy to the local community just resonates and goes further. We need to continue giving to our churches, to our nonprofits, and oh, by the way, you might write out a check to Simsbury Community TV. Thanks a lot. See you the next time. Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.